It is 10:30, so to try to stay on schedule, I'm gonna go ahead and get started with the next session, which is the project development, and will be followed up by a discussion on purpose and need. My name is Maria Overton, and I am the State Environmental Development Engineer for OEM. The material that I'm about to discuss, you can find a lot more detail, of course, in the PD&E Manual in Part 1, Chapter 4, and it describes the project development process. And like I said, I'm going to provide a general overview of this process. So the project development process begins with planning studies and ends with a constructed project. It includes planning, project development and environment, or PD&E study, design, right-of-way, and construction phases. And the PD&E study is a process to evaluate project impacts and comply with NEPA and other laws and regulations. And Pete and Ruth, before this session, they provided a lot of information related to this process and specifically to ETDM. So I hope that the information that I'm about to provide kind of helps you fill some of the gaps and from ETDM into the project development. So you may remember this slide from Pete's presentation earlier this morning. And basically what this slide presenting is the project development and the delivery process, which begins with the planning studies and ends with a constructed project, like I mentioned. And the department project development process is comprehensive. It involves planning, project development and environment, PD&E design, right-of-way construction phases. And the process, PD&E is the process for evaluating transportation project impacts and complying with NEPA. The project development process supports FDOT statewide acceleration transformation process, or SWAT. And the communication among various offices involved in the project development and delivery process and transitions of the project from one phase to another is critical to the project success. So the project managers are responsible for establishing and maintaining communication and coordination throughout the project development and delivery. This figure shows the project development and delivery process with the building blocks of each phase and how the phase connect with the PD&E process. These phases are supported through various activities and processes. For example, you see the ETDM, or efficient transportation decision making, here in the graph. You also see the SWAT process, like I mentioned, the statewide acceleration transformation, which shortens the time frame in which we deliver projects. It is a very good tool for the project managers, regardless of the class of action or funding sources. Also, one thing that I would like to point out, which is very important, is that the public outreach and interagency coordination is ongoing throughout the life of the project. So my understanding is that most of you are design PMs, so you may be familiar with the project involvement. So in outreach, so this should start in planning, and it goes throughout the different phases of a project. So in the planning phase, a project begins with the identification of transportation needs or the deficiencies throughout a planning process, and then it prioritizes short and long-range transportation improvements. For qualifying projects, ETDM is used, or the EST, to gather project information and coordinate with resources and regulatory agencies, also with the public and other project stakeholders. And this information is used to develop the scope of services for a feasibility study or for a PD&E study. Then we have the PD&E phase, where the department performs alternative analysis and also conducts environmental studies, prepares various technical studies, and completes the environmental document, which is necessary to obtain the project's location and design concept acceptance, or LDCA, sorry. The PD&E phase identifies and addresses environmental issues, if any, on a project. FDOT projects that are type 1 categorical exclusions, or CE, or non-major state actions do not have a PD&E phase. The environmental evaluation for type 1 CEs and non-major state actions, or NMSAs, are performed and approved by the District Environmental Office during the design phase. Now, information obtained during the PD&E phase is used to develop the scope of work for the design phase. So next is the design and right-of-way phases. So information obtained during the PD&E phases is used to develop the scope of work for the design phase, like I said. And the scope of the design phase also depends on the delivery method chosen for the project, namely design build, other typical design build project. So for conventional design projects, the design phase typically includes preparation of final construction plans, specifications, and final estimates. However, for other alternative contracted methods, the design phase does not include the final construction plan, and typically the acquisition of right-of-way occurs concurrent with or just after the design phase before the project moves into construction. The scope of the design phases depend on the project delivery methods. Environmental reevaluations are performed during this phase. Guidance for the design phase is provided in the FDM, the FDOT's design manual, for on-system projects, and in the Florida Green Book for off-system projects. And next is the project delivery. And this is where the transportation project is delivered, right? So the department uses a variety of project delivery methods, design bid build, to alternative contracted methods such as design build in the public-private partnership concessionaire. Next, let's talk about the planning process. During the planning phase, the purpose and need of the project is established based on identified transportation problems or deficiencies. Transportation land use, safety, public and agency involvement, and other planning data are the primary source of information used to establish or define the purpose and need for the project and range of alternatives to analyze. Technical studies for a project can be performed within the planning phase to define or refine project parameters and establish the purpose and need for the project. They may also determine funding needs, identify alternatives, including alternative models, and define the concept and scope for the transportation improvements, including general location of the proposed project. The planning studies inform the development of the project of work for the PD&E studies. Alternatives development may begin during the planning phase. Okay, so the linking of planning decisions, and I'm sorry, I think that my computer was a little bit behind what of my train of thoughts. Okay, so planning and environmental linkage, or PEL. So what decisions can be adopted? So different results or decisions from a state, from a systems level corridor or sub-area planning study may be used in the NEPA analysis if they meet certain conditions. Excuse me. These decisions include, but are not limited to, the purpose and need for the proposed action, general travel corridor or modal choice, preliminary screening of alternatives, methodologies for analysis, basic description of environmental setting, the elimination of unreasonable alternatives, mitigation efforts, and financial measures necessary to implement the project. Similarly, the following planning analysis from a planning product for a transportation project may be adopted. Things like the travel demands, regional development and growth, local land use and growth management, population and employment, natural and built environment conditions, environmental resources or environmentally sensitive areas, potential environmental effects, and mitigation needs for a proposed project. Now, there are 4 conditions to be met. So the relevant agency in the environmental review process may adopt or incorporate by reference these decisions from a planning product and based on these following conditions. I'm sorry, they're not for my apologies. The planning product was developed through a planning process conducted pursuant to applicable federal laws. Planning product must be developed in consultation with appropriate federal, state resource agencies and Indian tribes. Also, the planning processes included broad multidisciplinary consideration of system levels or corridor-wide transportation needs and potential effects. And this includes the effects on the human and natural environment. The planning processes included public notice that the planning products produced in the planning processes may be adopted during a subsequent environmental review process in accordance with this section. In addition, during the environmental review process, the relevant agency has made the planning product available for the public review. There's no significant new information or new circumstances that has a reasonable likelihood of affecting the continued validity or appropriateness of a planning product. The planning product has a rational basis and is based on reliable and reasonably conducted data and reasonable and scientifically acceptable methodologies. And in addition, the planning product is documented in sufficient detail to support the decisions or the results of the analysis and to meet requirements for use of the information in the environment review process. Also, the planning product is appropriate for adoption or incorporation by reference and use in the environmental review process. And lastly, the planning product was approved within the 5-year period ending on the date of which the information is adopted or incorporated by reference. So to ensure that the public is involved, an opportunity is provided, an opportunity for input and proper disclosure that the department may adopt a planning product, the following public notice must be inserted in the planning products that are to be adopted in a subsequent environmental review process. And it is important that the Office of Environmental Management, or OEM, should be consulted when making this decision. So I'm going to switch to the Alternative Corridor Evaluation, or ACE, which is a process used to identify, evaluate, and eliminate alternatives on qualifying projects before the PD&E phase. The decisions made during ACE can be used to the decisions made during the ACE can be used in qualifying projects such as the EIS, EA, and SEERS for new alignments, major realignments, major bypasses, and other based on projects based on consultation with the lead agency. Okay, the ACE process identifies and evaluates corridor alternatives using the methodology agreed upon by the project stakeholders. And this is documented in the methodology memorandum, or the MM. The results of the ACE process are documented in the Alternative Corridor Evaluation Report, or ACER. So first, the initial corridors, it is defined that the initial corridors are decided to advance the project. Next step would be to develop methodology memorandum, the MM, identifying the project goals, initial corridors, and methods for evaluation. The third step would be to conduct the study and refine corridors based on the MM, or methodology memorandum. And lastly, prepare the ACE corridor evaluation report, or ACER, with results and corridors recommendations for further study. The MM describes the goals of the ACE, and it describes the goals of the evaluation in the ACE and identifies alternative corridors, describes the methods for developing, evaluating, and screening alternative corridors, also describes the process for public involvement, and establishes criteria to form the basis for decision making. The methodology memorandum should include background information, describe the goals and objectives of the ACE, describe the methods that will be used to analyze the alternative and make decisions, and include a brief description of the stakeholders. Okay, and to refine the corridors, the district evaluates the corridors using initial data and the criteria established and agreed upon the MM. In studying the alternatives and considering input from the project stakeholders, the district may refine corridors, eliminate corridors, or develop additional corridors to avoid potential environmental effects. The refinement of corridors to avoid potential environmental effects also considers the corridor vision, purpose and need, and public input, as well as engineering and economic feasibility. Alternative corridors that do not meet the purpose and need are eliminated from further study through the ACE process and are documented in the ACER, or the ACE report. Alternative corridors that meet the purpose and need are then developed to a conceptual planning level sufficient to evaluate the benefits and impacts relative to the purpose and need for the project. So talking about the ACER, or the Alternative Corridor Evaluation Report, it summarizes the alternative corridor analysis, documents the basis for eliminating alternatives, public agency involvement is summarized therein, and documents travel demand forecasting, rationale, environmental impacts, socioeconomic factors, transportation costs, and network. Project issues with public stakeholders and agency as well. OEM reviews this report and is uploaded into the EST for commenting. And adoption and use of ACE decisions in the NEPA process is subject to a determination by the OEM. So next we're going to talk about, and I'm going to provide an overview of the project development and environmental phase documentation. So this phase, the PD&E phase, builds on the outcome of the ETDM screening, the SWAT teams meetings, and prior planning products and ACE as applicable to further define the project's purpose and need. The PD&E phase may also identify project alternatives that satisfy the purpose and need of the project, and environmental analyses performed during PD&E phase evaluate the project's effect on social, cultural, natural, and physical resources. Throughout the PD&E process, interagency coordination is conducted to identify project impacts, permitting requirements, project commitments, and funding sources. Commitments identified during the PD&E process can include requirements for future coordination, also for avoidance and minimization and/or mitigation for unavoidable impacts to resources. So the class of action for federal projects may have been determined during the ETDM programming screen. However, a class of action determination is not mandatory prior to advancing a project to the PD&E phase. If the class of action is known, the project may proceed as a Type 2 CE or categorical exclusion, as an environmental assessment or EA, or as an environmental impact statement or EIS. If the project is state funded, it may proceed as a state environmental impact report or SEER. Projects requiring a federal action or that use federal aid funds must meet planning consistency requirements outlined in 23 CFR Part 450 prior to submittal to OEM for LDCA or location and design concept acceptance. Okay, so the Type 2 CEs, this is a type of project that is a federal project that has no known significant impacts, but it requires documentation of analysis of relevant issues and public involvement. The document of record for an LDCA is the signed Type 2 CE determination for which is form, which is prepared in SWET. The technical reports or documents prepared to support these must be uploaded in the project file in SWET and summarized or referenced in the Type 2 CE form. A public hearing is typically required for Type 2 CEs, and OEM approval is also required for these types of projects. The processing and documentation for Type 2 CEs is outlined in the PD&E Manual Part 1, Chapter 5. And additional training is also available as computer-based training introductory courses, which is available for you. So now let's talk about the environmental assessment or EAs. This class of action is assigned to a project when the significance of the environmental impacts is unknown. Depending on the significance of the impacts, an EA will result in a finding or no significant impact or FUNSI, where the analysis of the technical studies indicates that no significant environmental impact will result from the proposed project. LDCA is granted with approval of the FUNSI, and if significant environmental impacts result from the action, then the project is elevated to an environmental impact statement or EIS. A public hearing is required for EAs, and OEM approval is required for these type of projects as well. And you can find more information on EAs in the PD&E Manual Part 1, Chapter 6. And of course, we also have CBTs available that provide more training, detailed training on this topic. So next would be the EIS or Environmental Impact Statement. And this class of action is assigned to projects that are determined to have a significant environmental impact. Prior to initiation of the project, a notice of intent is submitted to inform the general public and stakeholders that an EIS is being prepared for the proposed project. A public hearing is required, and the draft EIS, the final EIS, and record of decision or ROD are approved by OEM. Once the ROD or record of decision is approved, the LDCA is received. Then you can find more information on the EIS in Part 1, Chapter 8, and Chapter 9 of the PD&E Manual. Okay, so now let's talk about state, local, or privately funded projects. SEERs, or State Environmental Impact Reports, are state-funded projects that require a PD&E study. Generally, if a state-funded project qualifies for ETDM screening, a SEER will be required. These projects do not require a NEPA document. However, a SEER is a comparable environmental document and may be used by other federal permitting agencies that must follow NEPA if a federal permit is required. The districts approve these projects rather than OEM. When a local agency or other entity is the lead agency, a Project Environmental Impact Report, or PEIR, may be prepared. And PEIRs are used by non-FDOT entities when state funds are used, or the project lies on a state intermodal system, or SIS, state highway systems, facility, or a project advanced through other unique funding mechanisms, such as state infrastructure bank loan. Ultimately, the district should work with the local agency or private entity to determine whether a PEIR or SEER is required. The processing and documentation for state, local, or privately funded project is outlined in Part 1, Chapter 10 of the PD&E Manual. So environmental technical studies are performed and the results documented according to the appropriate chapters in Part 2 of the PD&E Manual. Environmental technical studies may include the following: water quality impact evaluation or water resources, natural resources evaluation, traffic noise study, air quality, contamination screening evaluation, conceptual stage relocation, Section 4F evaluation, cultural resources assessment survey, social cultural effects, drainage and floodplains evaluation. So these studies must be documented and are prepared in response to the relevant environmental issue and resources. The technical reports are sent to OEM for review prior to submitting to appropriate agencies for coordination or consultation. And of course, the these final reports are they will also become part of the project file in SWEP. So the documentation for a PD&E study typically includes the environmental document, technical reports, data memoranda, maps, meeting summaries, and input from the public and resource agencies. The PD&E project manager is responsible for collecting, maintaining, and filing documentation for all PD&E studies in the project file. All project documents are filed and stored in accordance with FDOT's records management procedure, utilizing the process outlined in Part 1, Chapter 15 of the PD&E Manual. Also, it's worth mentioning that a list of all the reports and design information to include in the project file is provided in Part 1, Chapter 4 of the PD&E Manual. All right, so it's 1 o'clock. This is Maria Overton again, and for this afternoon, I'm going to start the next session talking about scoping a PD&E study, and I'm also going to cover a little bit on the transition from PD&E into design. Okay, bear with me. There you go. So when scoping a PD&E study, the PD&E project manager is responsible for scoping the PD&E study. And for the scoping, the project development activity includes identifying and considering various project-related issues that could affect cost and schedule of the study, also to determine work activities to be performed for the project, and also to include or refine key project parameters and requirements sufficient to define the project. So what is the standard scope of services? There's actually a procedure, number 375-030-020, which covers the standard scope of services and the staff hour estimation guidelines for PD&E projects and design services. And there is a statement that says that both department and consultant project managers will utilize the guide documents in scoping and negotiating all consultant contracts for PD&E studies and design services. So I'm sure that since I believe there's several of you that are design managers, you should be familiar with this policy, or procedure rather. So the standard scope of services for a PD&E study, when before you start, you need to look into, you have to ask yourself a couple of questions. So is the design concurrent with PD&E? As you may be aware that a few years ago, between the PD&E, actually the OEM office and the design office and central office, we have been working hand in hand to provide guidance to for projects that are eligible to do PD&E and design concurrently. And the important thing is to identify those projects and that are appropriate for those for that situation, and just follow guidelines and identify the overlap opportunities. So if the project is concurrent, if the design project is concurrent with PD&E, then of course develop a standard scope of services for concurrent phases. If not, then you need to determine whether what tasks or activities have been completed ahead of PD&E, or should be. If there are activities completed ahead of PD&E, then the department provides the data or the report that will feed into the PD&E. If not, then need to determine what activities would be accelerated with the PD&E. If there were activities accelerated with PD&E, then need to ensure that those activities are listed and described and be in the knowledge of them. If not, then the PD&E would be a standalone scope of services. It would only be a PD&E study rather than a concurrent. So there are 4 options on to procure a PD&E studies. The PD&E contract followed by a design contract, which would be sequential phases, no overlap. One contract with both PD&E and design in concurrent phases. The third would be a PD&E contract with an option for design. And finally, 2 overlapping contracts, PD&E and design, that are procured simultaneously or separately. So what is the structure of the PD&E standard scope? So first, need to determine what the purpose of the project is. Need to be familiar with the project description and the objectives of the PD&E study. Need to include for public involvement throughout the study, all the way to design, which in the case that they were separate PD&E studies and design, of course, design would pick up the public involvement. Then, of course, needs to include the engineering analysis. That includes the alternatives, development and evaluation of alternatives. Then also needs to include the environmental analysis and the development of the different reports. Include the development of the environmental document and therefore the coordination with OEM for approval. And of course, the method of compensation and therefore the standard, the staff hours estimation, and any design services, because as you may well be aware, there's conceptual plans are developed during PD&E. So we have available a scope of service template, and there are guidelines available also in both OEM's website and the project production support website under the Office of Design. So the standard scope of services template can be it's a PDF document. A PDF document is produced. It includes default language with instructions and notes. and is developed using the web-based application SWEP. And shortly we'll show you how the PD&E scope of services is developed. There is flexibility. There's some flexibility to modify tasks in the tool. This includes scope activities with enough detail to meet the project objectives and to eliminate or scale down activities that were previously completed. As you may remember from yesterday's presentation, there could be some material, some information or data that we for PD&E can be adopted from planning. So that's why we have to be aware of of those products. How can they be adopted in the PD&E study? And of course, that needs to be taken into consideration when developing the scope of services. And like I said, there is guidance available in both OEM's website and in the production support website. And this falls to what I just mentioned previously. You can modify activities to be done also by others, and the several activities that could be needed or not during the PD&E study. So the instructions to prepare the scope of services, these instructions are available to describe how to develop the scope of services for a PD&E study. It defines the roles and responsibilities, emphasizes collaboration between various offices and disciplines, highlights important considerations before preparing the scope. It also explains how to use the scope of services development tool, discusses scope of services structure in detail, and explains information needed to develop each section of the scope. This is basically a screenshot from the information available in the production support website. This is right below, I think, the design information. So as you can see, the scope of services development tool will actually has a link to SWEP here. It includes the instructions to prepare the scope of services, the standard scope of services for PD&E study, and with the standard language. It includes the tool and guidelines for the staff hour estimation. So I'm not going to go into detail on all these documents here, the guidelines and the forms, but please feel free to go and look into these. And of course, you can reach out to either our office or the production support office for any questions or support you may need. Okay, so let me cover real quick the standard scope of services tool in SWEP. So requesting access, it is very similar to what Pete was mentioning this morning, requesting access for SWEP. So this is done through the district environmental leadership. For district employees, they should send an email to the environmental administrator, environmental manager, or project development manager. Then the consultant project team members would go through the FDOT project manager. And for each account, the request would have to include the name of the person, email address, and their role. So this is how you would access the scoping tool in SWEP. Very similar to what you were seeing this earlier with Ruth. The navigation in SWEP is very, very similar. So in this case, you would be setting up the project by using the project setup wizard. Okay, so you would start by using a blank scope of services, or you can also use a previously saved scope of services. That can allow you to not have to do the whole scope of service in one sitting, right? Also, you can use previously, you can basically recycle or use a canned scope of services for similar projects or similar activities. Okay, so this is how the wizard would look like. So the green background would be areas that need information. These are set up by the wizard, the yellow background. And again, I'm just going to go through these real quick. You have the ability to open on the top right-hand side, kind of like a little, like a tab index that links to those sections. And again, this is how the wizard looks like to create the scope of services. And at the end, you can create a Word document of it in a PDF if need to. And once you check for completeness, the system will let you know if there's still areas that need input, if there's unanswered questions, etc. You can save it as a draft, or then you can, once you're ready, you can just save it as a final document. Okay, so for concurrent design and PD&E phases, this is basically what it means. Both PD&E and design phases would be procured in one contract. In other words, one contract with both PD&E study and design services. The combined phases, being the PD&E combined with design service, is one contract. That would be what it means, or that the concurrent phase is not a PD&E study with an option for design services. So what is the standard scope of services? You have to look for opportunities on overlapping activities. So in the event that you have PD&E and design activities, of course, they're not two completely unique phases. They have to interact because the PD&E feeds in the design activities. So these are just some of the activities that are part of that there's an overlapping opportunity between both phases, such as public involvement, again, that goes throughout the life of the project, all the way to construction, roadway analysis, drainage analysis, utilities, coordination, structure analysis, signalization, ITS, lighting, landscape survey, etc. So to modify a scope of overlapping activities, the goal is actually to prepare one scope of service with design and PD&E study combined. So the purpose is not to become a significant learning burden to practitioners, but the department actually learned from other state processes that also do the overlap design with PD&E. And the approach has been looking into maintaining the integrity of the activities in the roadway standard scope of services and eliminating redundancies from these overlapping activities. Of course, this allows for time savings, which in turn turns into money savings. So this is a typical, this kind of represents a schedule. What would be kind of a schedule without the number of dates and whatnot, but on the activities that can fit into design. So there's flexibility in scheduling these activities, and it is important that the districts and the consultants can schedule the overlapping activities depending on the project's context. Again, not all projects are the same, right? There's not a one size fits all. Okay, so projects that have fewer environmental issues and lesser engineering complexities are good candidates for overlapping phases, PD&E and design phases. For example, class of actions would be the type 2 CEs or SEERs, roadway projects where only one build alternative is evaluated against the no build, projects that do not involve project interchanges, intersections, or intersection modifications, and bridge replacement projects that do not involve construction of segmental bridges or movable spans. So just one-to-one, right? And a reminder would be that both the PD&E and design must have been programmed concurrently, and that the final design, being the phase 3 and 4, will not start until NEPA is approved. So moving from PD&E into design, these are some of the responsibilities for the design project manager would pick up. And I'm sure that most of you are familiar with this. So the design project manager then reviews the project commitments made during the PD&E phase. And these are in project suite. They also coordinate with a PD&E PM, which if you're going to be wearing both hats, that would be a tremendous advantage for, you know, you would be involved throughout the life of the project. Ensure commitments are completed or accurately incorporated into the contract documents. The PM will also ensure commitments related to permit conditions are addressed. For example, species protection measures. Also needs to update the status of commitments during design phase. And for this, it needs to be ensured that the project commitment record is transmitted to the right-of-way or construction PM as applicable. And also re-engage with the environmental office or others to address commitments, including new commitments that could raise during the design phase. So more information is it's included in the PD&E Manual Part 2, Chapter 22. And do not forget the reevaluations during the different phases, including design changes, right-of-way, and construction.